Hi, my name is Letitia, and I'm a reporter with the Willamette Week. We are here to do the endorsement interview for Metro Council District 5. We're just going to start with a couple brief bios. We can start with you, Mary. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, about the district, as well as why you're running for this position.
Okay. Mary Nolan, thanks for hosting this. Thanks for this opportunity for a conversation. I am, I would describe myself as an advocate and a convener. Professionally, that has meant that I have served in the legislature advocating for civil liberties, economic justice, racial justice, education, and conservation, particularly around the state's land use system. I'm also a bit of a budget whiz or wonk, depending on how you perceive that. I think budgets say a lot about what an entity really values, whether that's a family or a business or the metro government. I have run large enterprises in the public sector, leading the Public Works Department for the city of Portland when we added more than double the percentage of women on the workforce, more than double the percentage of people of color, not just on the workforce, but in leadership positions, and launching the curbside recycling program for the city of Portland and the Clean Rivers program for the city of Portland. I'm also, as I said, an advocate. I co-founded Oregon NARAL. I served as CEO of Planned Parenthood Advocates. I am on the board of OHSU's Avell Gordley Center for Health and Healing. And I like to push the envelope in ways that are significant and bold, and then follow through and actually deliver on achieving the changes that we want to see. I'm running for this race because I'm running for this position because Metro needs that kind of energy, values, leadership, and capacity to deliver results, capacity to convene people who have very, very different points of views on issues, focus their energies on finding common ground, on finding a way path, and then closing a deal so that we actually have progress and not just process.
Thank you, Mary. Chris, would you mind going next?
Sure. So I followed a job to this region in 1988, and instead of following my plan and staying for a couple of years, I fell in love with this place. I've been privileged to enjoy a 30-plus year career in the region's high-tech industry. And for the last 25 years, I've had a parallel career as an activist, working on issues of transportation, healthy neighborhoods, good governance. That's often taken the form of serving on advisory groups, including the last 11 years on the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission, where I've been able to work on issues from housing to transportation to stewarding an update to our climate action plan. I've also served at Metro, the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, and also the Transportation Policy Alternatives Committee. So I've got a good working experience of how Metro makes policy. Also served for 6 years as a City of Portland budget advisor, sitting with City Council as they reviewed bureau budgets and formed the budget each year. I'm really focused on two issues: climate change. I have been working to make our transportation system more sustainable for the last 15 years. I want to continue that at Metro. As we know, the greenhouse gases in our region, 42% are from transportation, and they're going up instead of going down. That's something we have to get a handle on. The other big issue for me is housing. Metro has been trusted with the voters with a lot of resources for housing, both the Affordable Housing Bond Measure 2 years ago, which I helped campaign for, and this year with the Supportive Services Measure that was adopted in May and will begin to produce revenue about the middle of next year. Housing is a new policy area for Metro. I want to take what I've learned on the Planning and Sustainability Commission and help Metro do a good job with that and be accountable to the voters. Thanks.
Thank you. So my first question, you kind of addressed this already, Chris, but what would be the very first, an example of something that would be your very first thing that you'd focus on if you were elected into the term? Yeah, we can start with you, Chris.
Sure. So I think the first thing is looking at Metro's climate smart policies, which are sort of the regional version of a climate action plan. They're currently calibrated for a 35 to 39% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2035. We know that the International Panel on Climate Change says we have to do a lot better than that. We have to get about half the carbon out of our systems by 2030 if we want to stay on a path to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius. So first thing I do is call for a reevaluation of those policies and a recalibration, which is similar to what the city of Portland is doing right now with their climate action plan.
Thank you. And what about you, Mary?
Housing and shelter. Metro has a lot of responsibilities that I care about and that I bring experience and connections to deal with. But I've actually already started connecting with Metro councilors about the urgency of dealing with housing and shelter for people. The voters passed, as Chris alluded to, a supportive services measure, which provides a great deal of needed funding for improving shelter and coordinating services so that people who are living on the street, who are living outside of a home, can get health services, mental health services, job connections, vocational training, and those kinds of things. But the voters consider this to be a crisis. And in fact, the campaign that supported that measure, which I supported, talked about ending the homeless crisis. Metro's not treating it like the crisis that it is. 18 months of planning is inappropriate when we've got people who are in desperate and unhealthy conditions for themselves and their neighbors and other people camping in their environment. So I've been talking with Metro councilors about expediting the revenues from that through a tax anticipation note, particularly given that we all know the winter is coming. Outdoor living conditions will turn dramatically hostile to people who are ill prepared for that. And we know a lot of solutions that can be helpful. We need to do them right away. The related part of that is Metro's affordable housing bond measure, which the voters approved in 2016, 2017. And that is designed to catalyze, to incentivize production of additional affordable housing units, mostly apartments, for working families. Metro has not provided the diligence and the review and the rigor in overseeing those investments. Several of the earliest projects under that bond measure that Metro has approved, I would say largely because of that lack of rigor, are coming in at total price tags of approaching $400,000 for an apartment. Private market, motivated developers, home builders are producing well-located, top-notch, safe, comfortable 2- and 3-bedroom apartments that are coming in without government subsidies at a cost of about $200,000 a unit. If Metro could learn from how they're doing that, in simple terms, Metro could incentivize the production of twice as many homes affordable to working families as their current model would allow. And I want to energize around that immediately, because that, again, is something that is time sensitive, pressing for the families who need that housing.
Can I ask a couple follow-ups there? So what is the status of, the funding mechanism you mentioned? Sorry, it's been already a long day of endorsement interviews to get funding for homeless services faster. I mean, that seemed like an obvious thing to do. Where is Metro on it as far as you understand?
First, let me explain the mechanism. The voters have approved taxes on upper income taxpayers, on marginally above a certain level, not on all their income, just the income above 180,000, or I don't remember the details. Those are approved. Those will be collected for the tax year starting January 1st, 2021. Similarly, just as an explanation, Metro we're going to talk, I'm sure, about the transportation measure. Metro's already talked on the transportation measure about, even though the revenues won't be collected until 2022, they are going to sell bonds, which will be guaranteed by those future revenues, and use the money right away to build transportation projects. The mechanism I'm suggesting is very similar for operating activities. They're not bonds, but they're called tax anticipation notes, which are exactly what that name says. Because you're anticipating the revenues, you sell a note to someone who says, I'll lend you $50 million against your $250 million annual tax revenue, so that you can start immediately and provide those services. And then you repay it as soon as the revenue comes in. It's actually a fairly common technique that the city of Portland uses, the state uses, and it's very similar to the bonds that Metro's talking about for capital. What it does is it says, yes, we as Metro acknowledge and believe this is a crisis. It can't wait 18 months, now 12 or 15 months. It has to be something we react to immediately. And I'm not suggesting the full $250 million for the first year be brought forward, but $50 million invested in shelter and job training and other services that would help stabilize the families that are now living outdoors would be dignified for them and lower the costs of rehabilitation or recovery services later on.
And I think, in fact, Metro is already doing a tax anticipation note to set up the tax collection system. They have expenses to create the collection mechanism, and they are borrowing in exactly that same way. So it seems like a sensible mechanism.
And we should do it for the people who deserve the services, not just for the administrative staff at Metro.
So do you know if they're doing that, or that's something you're pushing for?
In the conversations I've had, they have not, it appears they haven't even thought about doing it. So I'm opening a suggestion to them to expand and use it for the recipients, for the beneficiaries.
And do you have an understanding of what's happened that Metro has been? I've noticed some of those, the costs of some of the early projects are what you say they are. Like, do you have an understanding of why that has happened?
I think it happens because Metro does not see its role. We're talking about the affordable housing bond measure.
Yes, like the 400,000.
Has not seen its role as being providing an opportunity to set a goal, set an expectation, insist on some rigor. It will require working collaboratively with the local cities, because most of the projects will be built by cities, maybe counties. And it requires an understanding of how the system works. Housing is a new responsibility for Metro, not something that the council members or their staff, now they've brought staff up to speed, but it is a new area for them and not something that they kind of have an instinct about or know how to jumpstart.
So, one factor Metro, sorry, can I jump in? One factor that Metro has to worry about, as do all the other governments, is that anytime we have a government-sponsored project, we have to pay prevailing wage. The private sector doesn't have that, so part of the cost advantage the private sector has is being able to pay a market wage rather than prevailing wage. So I think while I agree that we need to make the money go further, let's understand that the government has some policy obstacles that we have all said are important things for government to do that we can't ignore.
And prevailing wage,
So,
just
I
to
don't think
clarify that,
I don't think we have
prevailing
to-
wage requirements add 8 to 10% under numerous studies. They don't add 100% to the cost of construction.
Okay. And I had a follow-up to your, and this will come to both of you, but Chris, can you, hypothetically, let's say, I'm a climate voter. Why on earth should I vote for the transportation measure?
Because I think in the end it's good for climate, but in the very immediate term, it's good for both safety and equity. You know, the transportation system has to produce a lot of outcomes. It has to provide access, so you know, we have an economy that works. People can get to work, they can get to school, they can get to their daily needs. And the current system is neither equitable nor safe. So an important step forward with this measure is that we will, you know, the streets in East Portland where people die regularly just trying to cross the street can get addressed, that we're addressing the underinvestment we've had in communities that have higher concentrations of BIPOC people, lower income people. But to get the transportation system working towards our climate goals, we have to have a combination of carrots and sticks. This measure does not have any sticks. That's why it's essentially climate neutral. The carbon emissions will be about the same as they are on the no-build scenario. But when we couple it with regional demand management measures, something like an equitable system of congestion pricing, the investments made by this measure will provide people with choices other than driving alone. Today, they don't have a robust range of choices for doing something other than driving alone. So this will be a key component of putting together a total system that addresses climate.
But really, we couldn't spend this money and come up with enough carrots to get more people on public transit, hypothetically, without the pandemic?
I think a pure carrots approach to that would be much more expensive than what a combination of incentives and disincentives will be. Yeah, the advantage of congestion pricing, of course, is it raises revenue that we can use to do things like expand our transit system.
But really,
So,
it's this, like, you couldn't come up with a similarly priced measure that would have more of an impact on, I mean, the climate impacts are getting people on transportation, on public transit, correct? So why, like, really, we have to spend this amount of money and still, just as a carrot, we only get a fraction of a percentage point decrease in emissions?
so certainly if I were picking a project list, it would look different than this, right? But you know, I'm not the only one picking the project list, and I give credit to the outreach that Metro did, the groups they brought to the table, a large voice for BIPOC groups, and those groups are strongly supporting the measure. So this is progress on a variety of dimensions. Could it be faster on climate? Sure. Would it have the same level of political consensus as it does now? If it was more climate centered, I'm not sure. So I think it's moving in the right direction. Sure, we could all wish it moved faster, but I think it's a good step and we can build on it.
Okay, I'm going to cut in here just to cut to the chase. Can each of you, I actually don't think we need to go to you on and Mary, but can you give us 2 or 3 examples of how you're different from your opponent? And since I was just asking Chris questions, can we start with you, Mary?
Sure. I approach this job very differently than it appears Chris is approaching the job. I see the Metro Council as the governing body, the legislature of the Metro. I'm not running for president of Metro. I'm not applying for a job in their financial analysis or parks or land use planning departments. I'm running to serve as someone who legislates, sets policies, sets budgets, tackles tough issues, brings people together. Those are what a legislator does. Chris seems to be running for a job as an analyst or a department head on staff for Metro. He talks about his analytical skills and throws data out. I think there's a big difference in the way we see the job. I have a track record of delivering significant, complex results in a legislative environment. Updating the statewide land use planning system, balancing a budget when we were down $1.5 billion from what it would cost to continue providing the services that Oregonians wanted and need. Finding solutions on healthcare to expand the Oregon Health Plan and make it sustainable on an ongoing basis, which required bringing together advocates for patients, advocates for nurses and doctors and clinics and hospitals, businesses, and people representing patients and beneficiaries of the system. Those are the skills I bring. And I do it in a way that doesn't create divisions between me and people with whom I disagree. I am very open about where my positions are. I have a track record with 7,000 votes on the public record on positions I've taken on a lot of issues that overlap with Metro. I can disagree with a colleague, an advocate, an affected taxpayer or beneficiary on one subject and not have it taint my ability to be able to work with them on different subjects or even on some of the implementation issues around a policy that we've disagreed on. That's a skill Metro needs. I'm very good at it. I think, in fact, you all said I am one of the savviest and most effective legislators Portland's seen. I think those are the skills that Metro needs, and that's what I can bring.
So 2 follow-ups. One on policy. You've switched one of your positions since the primary. Your view on the Rose Quarter.
Yes.
You not? Why did you switch? I mean, you've switched to agree with your opponent on that.
I have.
Why not view him as a leader on that we should?
I have switched
because, you know, he led on that.
I didn't switch because Chris showed me the wisdom of his position. I switched because the affected community organizations had brokered a deal with the ODOT Commission and with the ODOT planners on how that project would be developed in ways that were that they expected and that initially ODOT had agreed would be beneficial for the community.
Okay, got it.
And I supported the groups that had agreed to that. When ODOT yanked its agreement, I went back to joining them and saying, bad faith ODOT, that changes things.
You're mentioning your budget skills. What's going to be required at Metro? Do you want to close some of the venues? Like, what do you think from policy level is necessary at this point?
Lots and lots of big issues. I have not done a deep dive into Metro's budget. I would rather not close venues. They are assets that the voters, the taxpayers, have invested in through construction bonds. The convention center for the city of Portland, for P5, it was city of Portland voters. For the Expo Rec Center, it was, I think, Multnomah County. Those are investments that the voters made of their own volition. And I think we should preserve the long-term value of those assets. The world is dramatically different than it was in January with respect to venues, performing arts venues, convention and meeting venues, even the Oregon Zoo. So I think the important thing there on the budget is to make sure Metro is insisting on creative solutions to both the short term, 2 to 3 years, because I think those venues will be affected for probably 2 to 3 years, and then the longer term. And we have to consider whether people will ever come back to ginormous conventions in anywhere near the volume that they participated in them in the before times. Other issues on the budget, as I've mentioned, the affordable housing bond measure, that's a budget issue, because if we can achieve twice as much good outcome, that's a huge benefit for the taxpayers and the people who will occupy those homes. One way or the other, the voters will decide whether to approve the transportation measure. And either way, there will be very significant budget decisions to be made about specific project implementations, parameters around those. If the measure's approved, and if the measure's not approved, what will we do to address the well-documented and felt, and people feel the shortcomings of our transportation system every day. And those shortcomings won't go away if the voters disapprove that measure. And there will be a lot of work to bring together people to come up with a different solution based on budget, projects cost, but also revenues that can be supported by voters.
Chris, do you want to draw 2 or 3 distinctions from your opponent?
So I think I would characterize it a little differently than what Mary said. I understand completely that we are legislators, as I have been on the Planning and Sustainability Commission. That is essentially a legislative first step before things go to City Council. But I don't see myself as a convener. I see myself as an advocate with a point of view and a set of goals to which climate is central. And when I go into the legislative process, I am looking to move the consensus point as far as possible towards those goals. A good example is my work opposing the freeway expansion, which I started in 2012. I was the lone vote in 2012 saying this is a really bad thing to think about putting in the Central City Plan, to a robust debate in 2017, where the vote was then 6-4 to continue. I still hadn't won the day, but then later in the process, a majority vote on the Planning Commission to request a full environmental impact statement. So I am, to use the wonky term, I'm moving the Overton window. I'm moving the range of the outcomes that are publicly acceptable and seen as good policy. And I will consistently do that. I've done it in the Planning and Sustainability Commission. I did it at MPAC. I will do it on Metro Council. I think another significant difference we have to look at is the way that we are funding our campaigns. I have voluntarily imposed a limit of $500 on contributions because, frankly, there are lots of entrenched interests that have an interest in keeping climate policy where it is today, continuing the use of fossil fuels. I want to be independent of that. My campaign is fueled by more than 600 individual donors. And I see the big money in campaigns as a significant obstacle to progressive change.
Thank you. So we are just about out of time now, but we can quickly ask you a fun question we do with everybody. What is your most memorable Zoom call that you've had this year, or any kind of virtual call?
Preferably the most embarrassing and awkward.
We start with you, Mary.
Fun. Oh, I'm not a big fan of Zoom, sorry. Probably the most fun, though, was...
Most embarrassing and awkward.
Oh, embarrassing and awkward. Including
this one, of course.
Not yet. Are you trying to make it embarrassing, Rachel?
No, Mark Zussman isn't here, so definitely not.
I'm sorry, I'm coming up blank.
We can come back to you, Chris.
All right.
Well, my persistent challenge with Zoom is how to light myself so I don't have a shiny forehead. And I'm doing pretty well today. But I think the most memorable call was an event during the primary. It was when we had first gone virtual, and I had some friends who were hosting a joint house party for myself and Cameron Whitten. so we could both present our cases. And we were Zoom bombed by people with racist epithets, and I will certainly never forget that one. We all learned a lot about waiting rooms and passwords. So it was unfortunate, but learning experience.
Do you have one now, Mary?
Yeah, this may be another distinction between Chris and me because I am not the tech whiz that he is. And you'll notice that the background behind me is stagnant. It's real. It's actually something I can touch. I tried to do the the whole idyllic scene thing, and I ended up being somehow behind the scene, and I would be talking and the St. John's Bridge was talking to everybody. So I've come back to real stuff you can touch and feel.
It's lovely. Thank you both for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a
Thank
bunch.
you.
Cheers.